Hello fellow coders. Today, in this video, I will show you how to use Google Sheets API with Flask to create a public gateway API. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To start, you will need to install the Python module for Google API and Flask in your computer. I already tackled this in the previous tutorial, so I won't explain it here. Now, I will use the files from part 3 of our tutorial for our simple Flask application. I will leave the link in the description so you can access them. Next, let's open Visual Studio Code to start modifying our existing Flask app to become a gateway API of our Google Sheets. Here, I already created a directory for our tutorial. I will copy the files from our Flask application. If you can recall, this is the simple Flask app we created. Now, let's combine the codes for Google Sheet API with Flask. Sorry about this, I copied the wrong Python script. Instead of Google Sheet API, I copied the Google Tasks API. You can skip the video to 3 minutes and 45 seconds mark. That is when I start to realize the mistake. I will fast forward this portion of correcting my mistake. Here, I copied the code of our Google Sheet API. This was same code from the previous tutorial. This code, by the way, is used to create instance of credential without reading the credential from a JSON file. Indeed, very handy if you want to store the credentials of multiple users in MySQL database. Let's copy the necessary imports. Again, this code, by the way, is used to create instance of credential without reading the credential from a JSON file. Indeed very handy if you want to store the credentials of multiple users in MySQL database. Now let's try to add some additional endpoints to our Flask app. Wait for a minute, I am checking my guide. Note, the current endpoint we have is for the base URL which returns the index.html. From our previous episode, let's copy the read sheets method. Instead of printing the values in console, let's modify it to return a JSON object. Now let's add the endpoint for read sheet. Since this is an HTTP endpoint, we'll need to create an HTTP request to call the internal method read sheet, which in turn access Google Sheet in our behalf. I will start Flask using CMD. I already discussed how to do this in episode 2 and 3, so I will not explain it in here. I will use Advanced REST Client to create our HTTP request for testing the read sheet endpoint. Now our read sheet endpoint is a post endpoint and expect a JSON body with parameter, range. So let's try to read the values from cell range C5 to C16. Oopsie, I think there was error from our internal read sheet function. Okay, I didn't update the internal read sheet to accept a parameter range. This makes our read sheet dynamic when it comes to what range to read. Let's try again to send a HTTP request. There, we successfully retrieved the values of cell C5 to C16. Now, let's get it on with the method to update Google Sheet. I will copy the update sheet method from my previous episode. Instead of hard-coded value, I will modify this to accept parameters for range and values of the cells. Since this is intended for a gateway API, we'll consider that we will barely update it once deployed in live. Again, instead of hard-coded value, I will modify this to accept parameters for range and values of the cells. Since this is intended for a gateway API, we'll consider that we will barely update it once deployed in live. Now, we'll add the endpoint for update sheet. We will use a post endpoint which accepts a JSON with parameters, range, and values. So far, I think that's it. I will restart Flask and test the new endpoint using Arc. For our testing, let's try to update cells D1 to D16 to add a new motorcycle rider. Hold on for a moment. I am checking my guide for the parameter values. I created a cheat sheet for it. I will include it when uploading the files for this tutorial. Take note that Google Sheet, the library from Google, accepts a two-dimensional array for the value of cells. It's time to test the endpoint with Arc. Okay, the success message was printed. The Google Sheet was updated using HTTP post request. This sounds good already. Now, let's try another rider in column E. Okay, the Flask endpoint for update sheet works flawlessly. Now, it is time to deploy our updated Flask app in PythonAnywhere. This gives us a public API to access and update our Google Sheet. Take note, I will leave it in your discretion to use necessary security on your public API as to not allow unauthorized access. In PythonAnywhere, start by clicking the web link in upper right. If there is no existing web application, click Add New Web App. Select Flask, select the Python version, then click Next. For this case, instead of using the PythonAnywhere's default directory for Flask, I will use my existing directory, website. This is the directory from our previous tutorials. Now, I will resume creating the web app with the root directory using website. Let us reload the page and browse the base URL to check if our deployed Flask app works. I think our previous file, app.py, was replaced by a boilerplate code created by PythonAnywhere. So far that is not of a concern since we will update that later. By the way, don't forget to use the Bash console to install the Google API and Flask module in PythonAnywhere. This was thoroughly discussed in episode 3, so I will just give you the run-through. Note: these two were already installed in my PythonAnywhere. I just shown you how to do it if you haven't done it yet. Okay, let's deploy our Flask app in PythonAnywhere. I will replace the boilerplate code from that of the code we did earlier. Then, let's reload the web app and test our public API with Arc. The initial test worked. The base URL returned the index.html. Now, I will clean the Google Sheet to check if our update will work. From using the loop back, we will now use the base URL from PythonAnywhere. I will test first the read sheet. This will be same as the testing we did earlier. The difference is that we are now using our public URL, which means it is accessible to anywhere with internet. Hooray! We successfully retrieved the data from Google Sheet using our public gateway API. Let me try another request. This time, let's reduce the cell range to check if the parameter range works. It seems the read sheet endpoint works without problem. Now, let us try to use the update endpoint of our public API. Okay, our public API for update works. This means you can use this endpoint to update your Google Sheet anywhere as long as you have internet and you have the necessary application to use it. I will test it for the second time for verification. Works as intended. As you can see, our View app is still working normally. This is just the public gateway API. You can now program different apps like Android application or Vue.js application to access your Google Sheet faster. Thank you for watching and happy coding. See you on the next tutorial.